Story 1. I believe an even better idea is ranked choice voting. People can vote for a first, second, and third choice. It would allow third-party candidates to gain momentum. To end the Electoral College and implement ranked choice voting. We should replace the current system with a ranked choice popular vote. I understand that outcomes like the one in New York are still possible. Thank you for all the additional voting systems that people have suggested. I'm learning so much. Story 2. You would need an amendment to the Constitution for sure. Good luck with that in today's political climate, even if you were doing something people universally agreed upon. Story 3. The United States electoral system needs reform. It should move away from a winner-takes-all approach and give third parties a chance to serve as a moderating influence when the two major parties cannot find a suitable candidate. However, what that system should look like is unclear. There are many electoral systems worldwide, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. Story 4. If it increases the chances of my side winning, then I support it. Otherwise, I do not. This is why this idea is unlikely to materialize. Story 5. I don't think anyone realizes that this is not something you can ever change. It will literally take a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College, and the smaller states will never agree to give up their power. You would need 75% of states to agree to do it. Story 6. The Electoral College no longer makes sense. Why should a few swing states determine the outcome when the majority has already chosen who they want? It's astonishing that one can win the popular vote and still lose. The people should be allowed to directly choose the president instead of relying on this system that makes votes in some states more significant than in others. The entire situation feels questionable, to be honest. Story 7. I am more sympathetic to the Electoral College than most people. I am not a die-hard fan, and I am not sure I would expend a lot of energy defending it. However, I do not think it will solve the problems people believe they have with it. First, you cannot simply replace the popular vote totals with the Electoral College system. Had Clinton and Trump run under a popular vote system, the result would have been different. They both would have campaigned in different places, emphasized different issues, aired ads differently, and voters may have voted differently. For example, a Democrat in Texas may have voted for Clinton instead of a third party because they knew Texas was going for Trump. Similarly, a Republican in New York might have voted differently. Would Clinton have won the popular vote in 2016? Probably, but it is not 100% certain. This scenario applies to nearly every election we have had. I think there are some advantages to the Electoral College. Do these advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Probably not, but I believe it is a lot closer than people think. At the end of the day, no voting system is perfect, even ranked choice or straight popular vote. There is always some mechanism in any voting system that may be inefficient at choosing a winner. Ranked choice seems like the best option, but I personally would still retain the Electoral College alongside it. Story 8. The United States is a federation of states. Most people who advocate for a simple popular vote in national elections do not understand this. It represents a deeper issue than merely stating most votes win. It would fundamentally change the entire system of government. Story 9. Not only should we eliminate the Electoral College and replace it with the popular vote, but we should also implement ranked choice voting for all candidates. Those who are frustrated with the two-party system in the United States will find that ranked choice voting gives third parties a chance. Story 10. Yes, that would result in many more people voting because no one could say that their vote would be wasted. It would be a great idea. Story 11. I think it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The issue isn't entirely with the Electoral College. It's primarily the Reapportionment Act of 1929, which capped the number of House seats and, by extension, Electoral College votes. This is what gives states like Wyoming such a disproportionate vote share in the Electoral College compared to a state like California. If it kept growing, we'd have something like a 1,000-member House of Representatives, and the vote share margin of the smaller states would still be greater than that of the metropolitan ones, but not so much so that it is outrageous. Some secondary benefits would be that with smaller districts, it is likely gerrymandering would be more difficult, and grassroots campaigns would be able to compete better at the House level against large donor groups. Story 12. As much as I recognize the issues with majority rule, no one has ever presented a reasonable argument for why minority rule is preferable. Story 13. As an outsider looking in, I've always thought the Electoral College system is as undemocratic as I can imagine. The only thing stranger is having federal elections managed by individual states. Story 14. One person, one vote is the only principle that makes sense. The Electoral College was intended to count black individuals towards the conservative vote while depriving them of true power and choice. With black individuals still concentrated in the heavily conservative southeastern states, the Electoral College continues to serve that same function. Ranked choice voting would be an interesting alternative, especially at the state level, to the federal districts for electing representatives. This could undermine gerrymandering and ensure that every person has equal influence on the makeup of their governments. Story 15. I support the idea. The president should be elected by popular vote. The state check has already been completed by the Senate. Additionally, the president and other officials should be elected through ranked choice voting. There should be a majority agreement. Donald Trump did not win a majority. There should have been runoffs. Story 16. As long as the states continue to have representation through the Senate and the House, I would not be opposed to this change at all. Story 17. It is disheartening how few people know this already exists. Story 18. I support the idea that a candidate can be favored by a majority of the population yet still not win, which seems perplexing to me. Story 19. This is common sense that most people support. There was an attempt to pass a constitutional amendment in the 1970s, but it was ultimately blocked by President Nixon and a few southern states. I am convinced this will not happen now, at least not soon, because southern states know they cannot win in a popular vote system. Radiolab has a really interesting discussion on this subject and the Bayseller Amendment. Story 20. I would support ranked choice voting or another alternative that encourages centrists to be elected, representing the majority in the middle. Story 21. The Electoral College should never have existed in the first place. It was specifically created to appease racists and slave owners. Story 22. The outcome, though not the intent, of the Electoral College results in a balance against pure popular vote, which is more important in a large area with a wide variety of people. The purpose of a republic is to balance a democracy so that a larger population in one area does not dominate a smaller population in another. The goal is to have a government that can ensure both groups have their needs met and voices heard without sacrificing the other. If we had a proper implementation of ranked choice voting, I could support ending the Electoral College, but not before. Story 23. Majority rule is not always the best option. If you have two wolves and a sheep voting on what is for dinner. Story 24. The Electoral Commission is not equitable for rural voters and needs to be abolished. It is unfair that a minority of citizens get to dictate what is best for the majority. Story 25. Just do the mixed member proportional representation like many Commonwealth countries do. Each voter gets 2 votes. One for a political party and one for a local representative. The party vote determines the overall number of seats each party receives in Parliament. The more party votes a party receives, the more seats it secures. The electorate vote elects a local member of Parliament to represent a specific geographical area. The candidate with the most votes in each electorate wins. For example, New Zealand's Parliament has 120 seats. 72 members of Parliament are elected from electorates, and 48 are from party lists. While the United States would obviously be larger, it is easy to scale up this system. Proportional representation means the total number of seats a party receives is proportional to its share of the party vote. If a party wins 30% of the party vote, it gets roughly 30% of the seats. A party must win at least one electorate seat or 5% of the party vote to gain seats in Parliament. This system is beneficial because it ensures fair representation, reflecting the proportion of seats a party receives based on its share of the vote, leading to fairer representation of voters' preferences. It encourages a wider range of parties and viewpoints in Parliament, promoting diversity and inclusivity. It often results in coalition governments, which foster cooperation and compromise among parties. Voters receive both a local representative for their area and a party that aligns with their broader political views. Additionally, fewer votes are wasted compared to systems where only the winning candidate's votes count, as party votes contribute to overall seat allocation. Story 26. That would be great. Majority rule has worked well for humanity. I look forward to living through witch hunts and other exciting events, including book burnings. Good times. Story 27. We have one president to represent the country. Every voter should have the same say in who that is. Smaller states are overrepresented in Congress. That should be sufficient for them. Story 28. I believe people who advocate for abolishing the Electoral College forget how the country was originally set up. We have popular votes in every state for governors and mayors, who affect our lives much more than who the president is. We are 50 united laboratories of democracy. We weren't meant to be one large entity. Story 29. First past the post still forces us into increasingly radical duopolies, but it's a start. There are alternative voting systems that mathematically allow third parties to function as more than a spoiler. Story 30. This is like asking how you would feel about removing the right to vote in presidential elections from everyone except those living in the 14 most populous states, as that would be the effect. Story 31. I used to be against the Electoral College unequivocally, but one of my friends, a middle school social studies teacher, explained it to me in a way that changed my perspective. I mean, I still have reservations, but I never understood this point until he told me. You know that image where the person in glasses looks shocked? Yeah, like that. What people are missing in the debate to eliminate the Electoral College is that we do not have one big election. We never have. We have 51 smaller elections. States plus Washington, D.C. Each state is completely different from the others. Life in Nebraska is different from California and Maine, for instance. There was a time in this country when each state functioned almost like its own country, with its own militias, economies, and currencies. That's why it's called the United States. What I'm getting at is that we are not one big country. We are 51 separate entities. It's like voting for the president of the world, if such a position existed. What Spain wants is different from what Bangladesh wants, for example. So when people say, we're putting the needs of Nebraska on par with New York, that's precisely the point. We have 51 separate elections because we are 51 separate entities. Story 32. We are fundamentally the United States, a government designed to allow significant independence at the state level. Given this structure, to be fair to each group and each state, it is important to maintain the Electoral College. This is similar to the balance established in Congress between the House of Representatives and the Senate. In a diverse and geographically extensive country, it is crucial to ensure that all perspectives are represented. Popular choice alone is likely a poor idea that disproportionately favors urban populations. Story 33. It is better to have a system that allocates Electoral College votes based on the percentage of the votes received. For example, if a state has 11 representatives and the voting result is 40% to 60% in ranked choice voting, then one candidate would receive 7 electoral votes, 6.6 rounded up, while the other candidate would receive 4. Story 34. I mean, this is a problem because you have chosen to give significant power to the president. If you went back to having the House and Senate decide how to run the country based on the laws they create, then you would not need to care about presidential elections so much. Story 35. Unless we are also going to significantly reform our entire education system, prohibit corporate lobbying, and insist on honesty and transparency in government, it would be a disaster. Story 36. No, as it is already a popular vote for the House and Senate. I would rather not make it any easier for either party to have a stranglehold on all 3 branches. Story 37. This is a distraction. First, the winner of the Electoral College is almost always the winner of the popular vote. Second, the candidates we choose from are more important than the individual we select. The last time I voted for someone was for Obama, and despite receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, even he kept Guantanamo open and increased the extrajudicial drone strike program. Story 38. It doesn't matter if we can't stop Russia's control of Trump. I'm pretty sure Putin has videos of him sleeping with children and Trump will do whatever he wants now. Story 39. It's much better logically. but states like Montana or North Dakota aren't going to have much weight in elections then. Story 40. The main flaw I see with just counting total votes is that attempted cheating and voter suppression can be rampant. Right now in rural Oklahoma, it makes no sense to cheat because the outcome is already obvious. Therefore, the highly partisan local election officials and workers don't really matter. However, if every single vote counts, a county that votes 80 to 20 might see cheating to make it more like 90 to 10. Every single precinct or county will end up like the current swing states with various issues, leading to the need for a substantial number of observers to prevent wrongdoing. Moreover, you will have incredibly lopsided state legislatures that will pass laws further tipping the scales in their favor when previously they did not need to. Story 41. I believe the Electoral College should remain, but it should be proportional, similar to the political primaries. This change would still give smaller states a voice in national matters while allowing voters in predominantly blue or red states to have representation. For instance, if a candidate won the popular vote in a state by 55% to 45%, they would receive 55% of the Electoral College votes, and the losing candidate would receive 45%. The challenge is that neither major party is likely to support this. However, third parties might be more open to the idea. Story 42. I would like to see blind voting where any campaign information is linked to an identifier for each candidate. Voters would not know the candidates' names, race, or gender. Instead, they would receive information about the candidates' historical stances on issues and future plans, allowing them to vote based on factual information rather than labels. However, this system could be easily manipulated, making it more challenging to track a candidate's past actions and assess their character. Being more logical about how we vote would be beneficial, as many people base their votes on emotions without understanding the reasons behind their choices. Story 43. This is a terrible idea. If we pursue this approach, the concerns of smaller states would go unheard. All candidates would focus on coastal states, leaving the rest of the country with diminished representation. We have sovereign states, and each state elects a representative to advocate for its interests at the federal level. We cannot exclude the states from this process. Story 44. The Electoral College is an essential component of the Constitution. Eliminating it would require a constitutional amendment. The smaller states will never agree to that, as it would diminish their power in elections. Furthermore, we are not a democracy. We are a representative republic. Do you want to eliminate that form of government? Doing so would mean abolishing the Constitution, which, even at the state level, guarantees a representative Republican form of government. It's an unrealistic idea. Story 45. It would be difficult to eliminate the Electoral College, as that would require a constitutional amendment. However, if we were to repeal the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929 and enact a phased expansion of the House of Representatives, it would have a similar effect. We could potentially increase the number of representatives from 435 to over 2,000, making the Electoral College more representative of denser population centers, while using the least populous state as a minimum population size for a congressional district. The Apportionment Act made sense in 1929 when it was challenging to gather 435 people in the same room and ensure their voices were heard. With modern technology, 90% of Congress members can now telecommute from their districts. Entire state delegations could nominate proxies to represent them in person in the voting chamber, and votes could be cast electronically. In my opinion, this approach would dilute the power of individual representatives, decrease the funding allocated to any single representative, encourage more young people to enter politics, keep representatives closer to their constituents, and likely open the door to minor political parties. Story 46. The United States was founded with a different mindset than we have today, especially regarding the individual states. In the founding era, people were politically attached to their state. Even today, if you ask someone where they're from, they will tell you which state they consider themselves to be from. However, today our mindset is more national, making it easy to overlook the conceptual basis involved with the Electoral College. It is true that the original way the Electoral College worked is not the same as it is today, but what developed has merit, as opposed to a straight popular vote majority. The founders wanted something that would endure. They knew from history that straight democracy failed, Eventually, a majority will simply vote themselves benefits from the federal treasury rather than focusing on concepts and ideas. Consequently, the national political system becomes a competition among candidates regarding who can offer the best benefit system. Contrary to what is often said, the Electoral College spreads power across the entire country, even if many states are typically strongholds for one party or the other during a certain historical period. If you are in Montana with one vote, you may feel powerless regarding your own interests and ideas. But if you align with the majority in Montana, you at least gain power from the 3 electoral votes for the preferred candidate. For instance, Al Gore could have won if he had policy ideas that appealed to a majority of the people in Montana. So, if you are in Montana, which would you prefer? Your 1 vote out of 130 million or 3 electoral votes. Even if you are in the minority and do not get your preferred candidate, you may have far more potential power in possibly flipping your state than with your single vote. Times change and realignment occurs. In most of our lifetimes, California voted for Ronald Reagan. It is a conceptual issue, not just about whether an individual got their preferred candidate or not. Large areas of the United States could be ignored in a national majority vote system. In fact, that is exactly what would happen. Detractors may argue that it doesn't matter, as land is not the same as people, but those people have interests and ideas as well, and it is not democratic to ignore them. The Democratic Party has been on the losing side in the 2 recent cases where the Electoral College outcome differed from the popular vote. They should consider that perhaps their policies are not aligned with the national electorate, and many Democrats are arguing exactly that. Again, all Al Gore needed to do was win Montana, his home state of Tennessee, or any other state, and he would have won. Hillary Clinton also won by millions in the popular vote. However, if you look at a national map broken down by counties, they lost about 70% or more of the landmass of the United States. Story 47. The reason we do not currently have that is that we are a democratic republic. This structure allows each state to have what is considered an equal voice. The electoral amounts change according to population. Story 48. No, because all it takes is widespread fraud for anyone to win. People dislike the Electoral College, but it was created to prevent fraud even 2 centuries ago. Story 49. I think it's important to remember what the initial point of the Electoral College was to begin with. The Founding Fathers feared the tyranny of the majority, which is why we have 2 houses of government and also why we vote for electors, allowing them to choose the president. This comes from a truly democratic ideal that all are equal. To ensure that even the smallest states have influence, each state was given electors based on their population, plus 2 additional electors for their senators. A fun side fact is that all electors from a state go to the same candidate due to state law, which is intended to maximize the state's influence. If you eliminate the Electoral College, then basically 5 states, California, Texas, New York, Illinois, and Florida, would have a disproportionate amount of influence in any presidential election. They might start electing candidates that align with their interests and values, which stem from their high population density. This creates problems as other states may feel overlooked and undervalued. If you want California to dictate policy, consider eliminating the Electoral College. Story 50. It is likely one of the most foolish ideas that arises. States are semi-autonomous, which is why they can tax independently from the United States federal government. One must be the president of the entire country, not just a few large cities. This all began as a compromise between rural and urban states. Without the Electoral College, why would a president visit Iowa or Kansas? The votes of small states would not count. Story 51. Most votes win has a significant flaw. It works for 2 parties, but if another party emerges, it can win the popular vote with only 34%. There are many ways to reform the Electoral College, and most votes win should not be one of them. Story 52. I feel that these questions and the multitude of bad opinions that follow are a result of the Republican Party winning. I don't hear this rhetoric anywhere after Democrats win. I don't hear about packing the courts either. Nor do I hear about changing established laws and undermining the Constitution because they didn't get their way. Our Electoral College was designed with purpose and it works just fine. Story 53. I believe a theoretical compromise would involve states allocating their electoral votes according to the percentages earned by each candidate within that state. Although the number of votes each state receives would not be balanced per capita as in an ideal system, individuals would feel that their votes mattered more if every state had a few points that could be influenced. In practice, this approach is unworkable because any solution would need to come from the top and be binding. It is unlikely that all states would agree if each were allowed to make its own choice. Story 54. The popular vote method would place presidential candidates in California, New York, Alabama, and other states during the campaign, not just in 7 to 8 competitive states. Story 55. The politicians will never allow it, regardless of the party. They focus on the swing states and save money in others. Story 56. I strongly oppose the idea. The last thing I want is for California to dictate how I should live my life in Arkansas. I would rather face extreme challenges than deal with the high cost of living and unfair taxes. Story 57. I believe this is yet another attempt to change the rules to benefit one party. If we transition to a democracy, the most extreme party capable of spreading fear could remain in power indefinitely. If states are no longer permitted to choose their president, then what is the purpose of states? If each state can send representatives to Washington, D.C. to draft laws, why would they be prohibited from sending delegates to match those House members in selecting the president? Story 58. I am against it simply because politicians would not listen to states with lower populations. They would primarily focus on locations with the highest populations, such as cities, and ignore rural areas entirely. Story 59. Nevada had ranked choice voting on the ballot this year. It failed because people had no idea what it was or what it was about, and there was a smear campaign suggesting it would be more confusing. Story 60. Our system isn't perfect, but it is the best we can do. Mob rule would lead to small states with small populations never receiving fair representation in Congress, which is why our founding fathers compromised on this approach. The founders understood that this could lead to one-person or one-party rule indefinitely, so it would never work. Even though I have voted conservatively, I would never want one party to have all the power all the time, even if it is a conservative party. Our founding fathers were wise in wanting the bureaucracy to move slowly and not to concentrate power in one person or party. They wanted many checks and balances. They knew the dangers that a king or dictator could pose to a nation. As Benjamin Franklin said when asked, "We have a republic if we can keep it." That is the issue. Both parties have forgotten the intent of the founders and that the states hold ultimate power. It is easy to forget the evils of kings and dictators and, like a dog, return to our own mistakes. Our republic is messy, but that is how it was intended. I would not trade a day of freedom here for a million days of supposed security in a socialist or communist country. Story 61. I want free and fair elections where everyone can vote. Voter suppression and district manipulation are significant issues, and until we address these problems, it does not matter whether we have the Electoral College or a popular vote. Story 62. Yes. Also, bring back publicly funded elections. Then, the average citizen could actually get their foot in the door with politics. Story 63. It would have been beneficial to implement that earlier. The college is the reason the Republican Party did not have to try to appear electable to the majority of voters, but it is too late now because there will not be free and fair elections in America anymore. Story 64. Any change to the Electoral College system would require a constitutional amendment, and that is unlikely to happen. The Interstate Voting Compact exists, where states have agreed to pool their Electoral College votes to go to the national popular vote winner. However, that will not take effect until enough states representing over 270 Electoral College votes sign onto it, which is unlikely to occur. A single national popular vote would still leave us with two parties, but it would at least eliminate the disproportionate power small states currently hold. To foster multiple viable parties, a ranked choice voting system is needed. Additionally, the Senate should be dissolved, as it is a relic of a past that promotes inequality and serves no purpose. Story 65. What you need is a parliamentary system, as in most democracies, where votes directly elect representatives, and the party with the most seats forms the government, sometimes through coalitions of multiple parties, which forces cooperation and compromise. That way, your individual vote truly matters. Story 66. We would have held Trump accountable this time, but the fact that a state with 750,000 people receives 3 electoral votes and a state with 39.43 million people receives 54 electoral votes is unjust. This reflects the same mindset that led to the 3/5 compromise, which was designed to grant disproportionate political power to certain states. Story 67. It is a great idea for a single president to be elected by a majority instead of a minority. The first step is to elect enough Democrats in state legislatures willing to support the National Popular Vote Compact. However, it is likely that the Supreme Court would find it unconstitutional, not to mention a personal affront to all its members who were appointed by the loser of the popular vote. Story 68. I think the United States should eliminate the presidency altogether and establish a proper parliament like a civilized country. Story 69. You are preaching to the choir. The Electoral College was conceived when travel to the polls was nearly impossible for voters, as there were no cars, and most people spent their days trying to survive. Nowadays, every voter who wants to vote can get to a polling place in person. There is no need for a proxy to cast someone's votes. Abolish the Electoral College. It wastes taxpayer money. Where is Elon? We just found him some waste. Story 70. I understand that this may provoke some criticism, but some of the main reasons, not related to slavery, for the existence of small state protections and rural protections from the beginning of this country still remain. Rural and urban populations lead distinctly different lives and face entirely different issues. When trash pickup fails in the city for a week or two, it results in a crisis. Rural areas may not have trash pickup, although some do now. Access to schools, hospitals, and basic social services is also markedly different. As much as some individuals criticize affirmative action, this initiative serves to give the rural poor a more equitable voice and to uplift them. This is the reason we have both a House of Representatives and a Senate, providing significant power to smaller states. I agree with the principle, although gerrymandering has severely impacted its implementation. Story 71. But how would the minority be protected in this scenario? Are you suggesting that the current landscape, where a minor group wins major positions regardless of popular vote, results in polarization towards the minor group's interests? Joking aside, it has reached the point where the United States and state senates can override the majority's desires, deviating from the original purpose of a balanced power structure. Stagnation seems to be the motive because keeping laws and regulations updated with modern changes means no accountability. Consequently, inaction continues, justified by dubious reasons that primarily benefit the ultra-wealthy. You can have 80% of the popular vote on a topic, but if it only occurs in densely populated areas, a significant percentage of sparsely populated regions can exert disproportionate influence and obstruct progress. Story 72. You mean when we reform our democracy following the collapse of the original last year? Yes, I would support it. Story 73. Never underestimate the power of unwise individuals in large groups. We argue over chicken sandwiches. I do not think removing the bumpers from the bowling lane is a good idea. Story 74. The best system would be a national popular vote with ranked choice voting. The Electoral College is undemocratic and has serious repercussions for the power of your vote based simply on where you live. Story 75. Absurd. The founders knew about the tyranny of the majority. It is specifically why we have an Electoral College. Story 76. It doesn't matter at this point because there will never be legitimate elections in the United States again. Story 77. Honestly, the Electoral College feels like the adult version of those arcade games where it appears that skill matters, but it turns out everything is rigged. The concept of most votes wins seems like a reasonable way to do things, similar to how every school election and parent-teacher association vote functions. Additionally, watching candidates actually campaign for every vote instead of just focusing on swing states could be refreshing. Think about it. No more hearing about the significance of Ohio every 4 years. But that is just my opinion. Story 78. Yes, the Electoral College should be abolished. I support ranked choice voting. How can we permanently remove big money from elections? Story 79. The Electoral College needs to be abolished now. Empty fields were counted as more votes than actual voters and unfortunately led to the current administration, which is harming our nation. In what other vote counting situations are the facts ignored and a random outcome provided? Those who cheat. Story 80. The Electoral College is ineffective and should be abolished. Hillary Clinton should have been the president in 2016, and I do not even like her, but I would have still voted for her if I had been eligible at the time, given who her opponent was. Story 81. I would like to scrap the Electoral College and replace it with a popular vote. The United States is trapped in a two-party system due to the Electoral College. If a presidential ticket fails to reach 270 Electoral College votes, Congress selects the president and vice president. The Electoral College is determined by 6 or 7 swing states. Additionally, the votes for the losing candidate in most states under the Electoral College do not count since it is winner-take-all. A popular vote would allow multiple political parties to develop, and the distinctions between red and blue states would no longer exist. Story 82. My only concern is that there is no way to get an accurate and precise vote count, as we learned from Florida in 2000. I believe we need a stipulation that if the popular vote is within a certain percentage point, we would revert to the Electoral College. Story 83. Absolutely not. We have a system that creates an even playing field. If it were based solely on popular vote, then 4 states out of 50 would always control the outcome. We would then face a lifetime of issues similar to the last 4 years, which our country cannot endure. We cannot have excessive taxation without jobs or innovation on our own soil. California's emission policies have stifled our manufacturing and simply shifted that pollution to other countries, where regulations are less stringent. This results in the loss of jobs and intellectual property because those countries replicate our designs using cheaper parts, producing inferior knockoff products that ultimately harm American-made goods. It's not a difficult concept to understand. Everyone needs to focus on making our country the best in every aspect, as it once was, a nation that was admired and respected by all others. If we do not, we may face dire consequences. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.